Everyone, we are going to look at using media queries in Dreamweaver today. Um, we are going to use our Candy Hearts website that we've been working on for a while. I promise this is the last exercise we will use this for. Started around Valentine's Day and now it's St. Patrick's Day, so it's been a while. But let me remind you first of all where we left off before we go any further. We had done responsive images. And so these specifically are responsive images, these 8 images that are in these divs. And how they are working, to recall, is they are set to be 100% of their parent. There's a selector that says make the images 100% of the parent. This parent is the div that includes the title here. It's basically, this image in this title, so it's just slightly bigger than what you see on the screen. That is set to approximately 20%. So we have 4 of them, that's 80 plus all the margins and padding. It ends up less than 100%. So remember, we have to consider all our widths when we're using percentages. So approximately they're 20%, and the image again is 100% of its parent. So the image fills that box. These buttons over here, they're all set up so that they are 80% of the width. There's a 10% margin here, and that leaves about a 10% margin here. This is a fixed width right here. We kept that fixed because we wanted that to stay just like it is on the screen. Remember, this was just designed so it would accommodate screens that vary in size but are, nevertheless horizontal, like a desktop or a laptop or a projector. There's one change I made up to this image up here. This is now a background image. Notice how, normally you can click and drag on an image, but you can't click and drag on this because it's a background image placed via CSS. The reason I did that is because I want to swap this image out entirely with another one. I don't want to just change the size or a property set to the image. I actually want to swap the image out, and this is much easier to swap a background image in CSS. It doesn't involve anything too complicated. We can do that with a media query. So this is a background image. We'll take a look at that real quickly. And just to show you what I've also had to do to prep for this thing is that on my desktop, in my local root folder, here's my new image that I'm going to swap into my design. It's clearly made for a vertical screen, for a mobile screen. Okay, here's the current one we're using, but it's going to actually be replaced by this one. We're just going to swap this background image with CSS and a media query. All right, so that's in my local root folder. It's ready to go. You will often have 2 versions of every images for your media queries because you'll need one for the biggest version of it, and you'll need a smaller one for the smaller versions of it. That's why the image generator in Photoshop lets you do different size images, specifically for different designs. You don't want your user to have to download some 1,000 pixel image when they only have a 200 pixel wide screen. It's just a waste of bandwidth and time for them. So you often need images to accommodate your different designs, just so you know. You'll have this prepped, and those are in my local root folder. All right, a few other things to remind you guys, just to show you. So my header div now has this background image on it. All right, this guy here is my background image for that. My links, they're 80% over here with, like I said, a 10% margin, so that would add up to about 100%. I did use pixels for the top margin. I can swap that out with the media query, but those seem to, as long as I stick with my widths being all percentages, all the math will work out fine. And my thumb divs, again, were 20% with 2% margins. So that added up to be, about 100%, a little under 100% when all was said and done. Okay, so how do we make a media query? Well, first of all, make sure you're on the right style sheet. Some people have had various style sheets because they weren't paying attention. They had an internal style sheet and an external style sheet. So I would put all those styles on the same style sheet if it's just because you weren't paying attention. Sometimes you do want different style sheets, but in this case, probably one style sheet is a good idea while we're learning. So I have my external style sheet. I need to add a media query. These selectors right now are all global. So if I click on the global, you'll see all my selectors because I've not set any media queries up yet. So every selector I've made works on the site at every size. All right, so, oh, by the way, this source, this is a Google font. All right, it's just a link. It doesn't really do anything. So I'm on my demo. I say I want a new media query, hit new media plus button, and I hit the little plus over here. And I say I want a max width. And here's where you typically would actually have more than one break. You might have a break at like 600 pixels and under for your mobile devices and somewhere around 950 for like an iPad or some other kind of smaller device. And then everything larger than that would be for the screen. You know, all these different devices vary, phones vary, you know, all this stuff varies, so there's no perfect numbers. So I'm always just Googling to check what the preferred numbers are based on all the devices out there and having a sort of, it's a moving target. So for today, we're just gonna use 700. We're just gonna pick an intermediate. And it shows you the code it's gonna write, and you say, okay. And some things happen. You get this line here. You get this green bar up here that has 700 pixels. We did a max width because we're working from a desktop down. A lot of times designers work actually with their mobile first, and so they do a minimum width. There's a link on Canvas if you want to read all about the difference between max width and min width. But for now, we're working from the desktop version down, so use max width. What else? Oh, if we look at our style sheet, now at the bottom of our style sheet, you will see it's appended our media query down there. All right, so this gives us several options to change things if we want. All right, so right now, if I click on this, you see there's no selectors. We have to add the selectors we want to change onto it. So go back to global and decide which ones are going to have to change. Well, my header div is going to need a new background image. So that's going to have to change. So I right click or control click and say duplicate into that media query. All right, it should be in there now. If I go in over here, you can see now it's been added. What else do I need to put in there? Well, my side nav div definitely will have to change because right now it's fixed. That's going to need to be repositioned. My links should be fine because they're all percentages. So I think they'd be good. If we decide later we need to add them, we can. So basically, I'm just going through and adding the stuff that I need to change. My thumb div definitely will have to change. My thumb div image, probably not because they're set to 100% of its parent. So if I change the parent, they should be fine. My thumb title is a class I put on the title. That might need to change. Okay. So we're all good. Now if I look at my screen, I have all these. Now before I start changing them, I want to make sure I adjust my screen so that it's actually under my media query size of 700 pixels. Otherwise, I'm not going to see my changes. If I leave it out here and I start changing these selectors for a screen of a max width of 700, I'm not going to see anything happen. It's totally going to throw me off in terms of design because I'll be making changes to something I'm not looking at. So make sure you put it under here when you're working with these guys. Okay, so let's start with an easy one, like the header div. The header div has a background image, and we need that to swap out. So click on the header div, go to my local root folder, and it's called Candy Header Small, JPEG, and I can say open. And it swaps that bad boy out. So let's watch what happens. So here's what happens. So there's the large size. Boop, 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 boop. And as soon as I get under 700, that happens. Now you can say, okay, oops, it doesn't quite fit. That's okay. I can also change I could have made that a little bit smaller now that I think about it. That might have been a good idea. But I can just also go ahead and change this value a little bit to accommodate it. All right, so I'm going to say 140 because I like round numbers. So it's 140 pixels now. All right, so that'll actually change sizes. See? Boop. You don't need to make the sound effects. I'll stop that. Okay. Easy enough, right? Really, the hardest part is like figuring out how you're going to design your vertical site. You know, you have separate designs in your head, and you know, hopefully separate mock-ups that you've made sketches of. Okay, so my side nav div, it had a fixed width before. Now we want it to be like, how much do I want it to be? Let's say 80% with probably like 10% margins. So we tab that, and then the margins, that would leave us 10%. Oops, I didn't want those locked though. The top one I only want to be about maybe 2%. Okay, and I also want to take out the background color. So I want these buttons just to be floating in that pink space. So for a while this is going to look kind of weird, but I'm just going to take this number and change the percentage of that background. So our buttons float just like that. That's actually how I want them to. We're going to work on this in a minute because obviously we don't want that happening. We also want to change some of our positioning for this because we had it fixed and we don't want that anymore. So I'm going to switch it to static. So that looks good. So now our images should be down under it. You know, everything should be back to a normal stacking order. And there they are. So far so good. All right, so let's make sure we're still under our screen at max width 700. We'll go to our content div. Make sure our screen is correct, which is also under 7, so that we're working on the right thing. And we're going to make the width of my content div percentage. I think 90% would probably be healthy. Just type in the number, Jeff. That'd be easier. 90%. And a margin of about 5%. I'm going to unlock this. 5%. So there's our little 5% margin. We got to get rid of this. I mean, that's that padding here. So I'm going to make the padding, I don't think we actually need any padding. We'll have padding on our divs inside, but we don't need padding on this box at all. So I'm just going to say 0 pixels. And I have to decide, so there we go. That's looking pretty good. I also have to decide, let's change this to a percentage, 1%. All right, I'm going to go ahead and fix the side nav bottom part there. Change this percentage to like 1% as well. All right, that stacks up much better. And this padding to something lower, like that. All right, excellent. I think at this point I have to decide if I want one image or 2 images in my columns. And here's where I normally would have 2 page breaks. You know, one for like iPads where I'd have probably a column of 2 images. So they'd be about, you know, 40% each with padding and stuff would make them equal about 100%. But let's just go ahead and pretend we're working just for a mobile device right now, and we'll just have a single image. So they'll all stack up. Keep in mind, these are all floated, and every one of these divs is exactly the same. That's why I only have, you know, this one thumb div class. So if we want to just have a column of 1, if we make it about 90%, that should do that for us. We need to modify the margins just a hair. So I would want a 5% margin, because we're not going to have any padding or anything. And that will basically put them right in the center. Let's uncheck this again and do like 1% for the top. Okay. There does seem to be some sort of, we could even turn the float off at this point because they're completely stacked top to bottom. And we're going to set the height. Turn that back on to auto. Let's do this. Flip. Okay. So here's what happens. We pop into there. The bottom bar, I'm glad I put the thumb title on here because that that block display is probably what's creating the uneven margins here. But you know what? I'm also going to take off that pink background color so you're not even going to notice that because that looks really bad to have that extra box in there. So let's go back to our content div. Oops, and uncheck I got to change my height as well. Set that to auto. Okay. Maybe just 4% here. Forgot there's a, yeah, okay. That all looks very good. Let's go ahead and preview this. There's a few little modifications I need to tweak, but you guys don't need to watch all that. Most specifically, I got to change that background color because I want this all to be one continuous thing. So I will take that background color off, or actually just change it to the same pink. So they match because that looks really horrific. And then we're set. So that will be our phone layout. This will be our desktop layout. And we'll need something in the middle for iPads and devices like that. Okay, last thing I'm going to change is my content div background. We'll take this guy, my little eyedropper, match it to this. And we're good. Now we don't see that weird line there. So yay. Awesome. If you have any questions, just email me. We are done here. Thank you.